Let's everybody introduce themselves. Who wants to go first? Okay, Dave, you go first.
Good choice, Dave.
I'm Dave Clark out of Tampa, Florida. First degree black in karate and fourth degree in Budoshin, and thoroughly enjoy our Zoom meetings. I learn a lot, take a lot of notes, and enjoy reflecting and researching after we cover these topics. I appreciate you guys sharing your perspectives.
Hey, morning, Al. Want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Al Goth here, Bowie, Maryland. Background in Korean and Chinese style martial arts, particularly Hapkido, which is, as we know, a Japanese derivative. And been on several of these Zoom meetings and having a good time. And it's nice meeting all you folks. And hello.
Okay. Darren.
Hi, everyone. Darren Melerine. I'm over from New Orleans, Louisiana. Traditional Japanese Jujitsu, Manamiru, Budoshin, and appreciate the workshops that we have and being able to meet great people and discuss everyone's views and direction and insight to martial arts.
Hey, Mr. Tom Deneen.
Good morning, Tom Deneen. Currently living outside Philadelphia with my parents, given my stepfather's situation. Usually I live in Baltimore and train around Baltimore. Currently I'm training with Al actually in his compilation from martial arts, but I go back in Budoshin for about 15 years and also have an interest in the sword and cane as self-defense items.
Okay, Thomas.
Good morning. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. TJ Gentry Martial Arts Academy in Southern Illinois, where we currently have 7 inches of snow, a base of ice, and then a covering of ice. So Darren, you didn't miss anything. I promise you that. It's rough. Been in the martial arts since the mid 80s. I was a lurker of Professor Kirby's in 2010, officially associated with Budoshin, and then recently cross-certified. So glad to be here.
Okay, and I'm George Kirby, 10th Dan Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm responsible for the Saturday chaos. Not really terrific group, and we're all opinionated, but we all manage to live together. Anyway, we started out with 3 topics, and then yesterday I gave you about 3 or 4 more, and then I forget who it is now gave me 3 or 4 more. So we're back up to 10 topics. And obviously we're not going to get through them all today, but it gives us something for the next 2-3 sessions. Anyway, first one is ageism in the dojo. How to gracefully address the question, how old are you? And does anyone wants to, I know Dave put out a short treatise on ageism, which all of you should have. Do you want to kind of summarize it for us, Dave, or?
Sure. It's a question I watched other sensei older than me deal with, and I knew my time was coming. I was actually surprised when it did, because you'll be getting flow and time moves so quickly. You go, hold on, when did I become this age? The long and the short of if you haven't read the article, I'd recommend doing so. And the general observation I have is that through the years, old is 20 years older than you are, and young is 20 years younger than you are. And those are pretty much the parameters, and it's all relative. When you're 5, somebody who's 21 years old feels quite mature and old. And when you're 20, somebody who's 40 is old. I remember walking past a high school reunion when I was in high school, and they were celebrating their 20th high school reunion. And I was thinking, what a bunch of old goats. Well, they were 37 and 38 years old. That looks pretty young for where I sit now. But anyways, the point I was making in the article is simply that age is a non-factor, and what we provide is not only demonstration, but also wisdom and experience. And in my case, I'm fortunate because I've been physically fit, so very few of my troops could keep up with me physically. So I particularly resented the question, and I've given a straight answer before, and this time I decided to keep them guessing for a while and mess with them, and I did, and had fun with it. Got them thinking.
Okay, we just added Kris Kademian, and all the way from, I believe, Zambia, we have, where'd he go? Jonathan Kruger is with us. Although I don't think we had, do we have video of Jonathan? Let me see.
He was on video last week. I think he
Yeah.
used his phone. Yeah, so
He's using his phone. So anyway, and we're dealing with the issue of ageism, and Jonathan's in the waiting room. Why is he in the waiting room? Waiting room participant. Okay, bear with me. Let me get him out of the waiting room. That's almost as bad as being stuck in line to go into a bathroom. Waiting room 1. How do I get him out of the waiting room? Admit. There we go. Okay. Anyhow, anyone else want to put in some thoughts on?
yeah, I'll just point out that I find age. I come at it from the opposite direction, and that I see it inspirational to find sensei who are in their 70s and 80s. In the case of the American Jiu-Jitsu Association, we have Dave Basil, who's probably 80, his early 80s. I don't know his exact age. Jeff Wynn, who's the vice president, who's 75. George, you're 70, 77, 78.
78 this year.
Yeah, I find all that incredibly inspirational. I'm 54, so I see my professional life. Yeah, I'll see people retiring in the next 10 years from jobs like mine in the professional world, but I think it's very inspiring to see people in their 70s and 80s remaining as active as you've been, and Dave and Jeff have been. Every week I go to Al's class, and Al's early 60s, I think, 61-ish. And Al is in incredible shape and has amazing flexibility for somebody any age, much less a 61-year-old. And I find it the opposite. I'm completely inspired and feel positive effects of having people who are older continuing to do this and not slowing down or finding different ways of engaging martial arts. I know in Al's case, Qigong and other stretching and breathing methods have become more significant as ways of remaining flexible and strong as you get older, and I find that very positive. I can't imagine somebody finding it strange. If anything, I would find it very positive. And look, as a 54-year-old, seeing that I have another 20 or 30 years in martial arts ahead of me, so I see it as positive.
Okay. Anyone else want to toss in 2 cents worth?
One of the challenges that I think is always in the background is the proliferation of videos and pictures of MMA fighters who really are just incredibly fit and by and large young. And many times that translates into, well, this is what a martial artist looks like. And seeing an older sensei sometimes seems to disconnect. I think that probably contributes on some level to what Dave touches on in his very well-written and enjoyable article.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of mean, I'm 70, I'll be 78 this year. And I think part of it, and I guess part of it goes back to, like Seki was in his 70s when he retired from teaching. I've always been in awe of the little old sensei in the corner who kind of smiles and manages to, when he gets out of the mat, nobody can figure out what he did, because he's gotten so subtle in his techniques that, you know, you sit and say, what did he do? And it doesn't seem like he's put out any effort. I think there are a couple things that happen. One is as Dave Clark said, our perception of old age changes as we get, as I don't like to use the word old. I like to use the word as we get more experienced. I know people that are 10 or 20 years chronologically younger than I am, and they're old people. They're so stuck in their ways and what they do that they're old. And I think a lot of it has to do with your own state of mind. When I had my right shoulder replacement last year, the doctor, who I finally figured out is probably either an MMA or something like that, he said, initially he said no jujitsu. And then he said, after the surgery, when I've recovered basically full movement of the joint, he says, you can't be thrown. You aren't going to take any falls. No locks on your shoulder, such as a shoulder lock or a takedown. He says, can you live with that? I said, yeah. I said, I haven't been doing that for a couple of years anyway, because of, you know, when you get older, one of your things is you need to preserve yourself, because if you get an injury, it's a lot more serious than when you're 20. And you don't heal up as fast, or you don't heal. And so those are some of the things you have to consider. I can still teach almost anything. And I think that's a state of mind. I had a couple of relatives that actually worked for a living up into their 80s, and then they retired. I know a couple of teachers, classroom teachers, that were in their 70s teaching and having an absolute ball. And they weren't senile, but they were a little crazy. But they had a really positive attitude. And I think that's the key, is your attitude in anything in life. But as you get older, it's so much more important. I think, as I forget who mentioned it, the maintaining your flexibility. It's about a 5 or 10 minute routine, 2-3 times a week. I've been doing it ever since I started jujitsu in the 60s. And it always amazes me when I start a new class, there are so many students that don't have the same flexibility that I do. And and I'm sure Al will agree with that flexibility, as you mature in life and become more experienced, that flexibility is so important to your mental and physical well-being. So, have I had students ask how old I am? I say, yeah, and I tell them, I've always tried to be honest and open with my students. It makes life easier. So anyway, the only thing, it's not, how do you say, when you're younger, you think you're going to be able to go on forever. And so the part of the two other things that I added on here, because I think Dave came up with the topic initially, is how do you work around? I don't know how many of you, or if any of you, have any physical limitations. Okay, so the question is, if you have any, how do you work around them? And two, and I loved Darren's response when I came up with the second topic, because he had a great reply. You're going to give it to us, aren't you, Darren? I had a great reply. I said, when is it time to retire? So does anybody want to handle either of those, or Darren, you want to deal with it? When is it time to retire? Want to make your comment that you made in the email to me?
Sure. I was like, what's retirement? I didn't know that there was a retire. I didn't know that there was retirement. I think that when you become or when you start to truly understand what we're doing, it's just not only a physical thing or mental thing, but to me, martial arts has become a way of life. And I didn't know that at some point I would decide to just stop. There's always some way, somehow, something that I can continue to be committed to, continue to be dedicated to, continue to contribute to. It's just much more than the physical activity. Certainly there's always something, and you could tie it back to the first topic, that you can do in an effort to help the art grow. So for me, I was like, wait, I didn't realize there was a retirement. There's no retirement.
Yeah, I've never thought there was retirement either. I realize at some point I may have to stop unless someone upstairs decides I'm going to stop. And then I'll go back, I'll go to the great, as I say, to the great tatami up in the sky and continue on. So there is no end in my book.
Thomas, Darren, to your points, I love the perspective. A guest sensei that we had in our class a number of years ago, several times, is still teaching. He's in his mid-90s. He still regularly teaches classes outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And I was surprised to look him up on the web and find out that he's still very actively teaching at the mid-90-year-old. Fascinating.
Yeah, I think part of it is, and for those of you that are young'uns, which is all relative, we all have our jobs in the real world. The hard part for people who retire is that if they don't have anything else going for them, they don't have another hobby or another interest or something like that, that they can continue to, it keeps you going. If they don't have anything, they don't last long, because they have nothing else to do. And the mind and body, I think, need a continuous challenge to stick around, for lack of a better phrase. And so for those of you, and we're all fortunate that we have something that we can continue to do even after we retire from our quote unquote professional career, that we can continue to do. And that's critical to your survival and mental and physical survival.
In the Asian cultures, as you grow older, you grow more valuable. And that's just a cultural difference between a lot of the attitudes in the United States and the Asian peoples. If you guys have an interest, this mid-90s, his name is Walter Oka. You can Google him and look up, and you can see him leading classes. I watched him lead classes in another area dojo wearing a helmet, and it was just delightful to see him in front of 40 people, and they're all matching everything he's doing. At age 81, I put a hand throw on him, and he came out of it with a flip side fall. Totally dropped the draws of everybody. 81-year-old guy still doing flip side falls. Walter Oka is his name. I spoke with an 80-year-old sensei a couple months ago, and I mentioned Walter Oka to him, and he admitted to me, he says, I'm 80. I was thinking about retiring, but I'm not thinking about retiring anymore, seeing what Walter Oka is doing. It's spelled just like it sounds, OKA. So feel free to look him up. He has a fascinating life story. And I won't,
How do you spell that, Dave? How do you spell the last name? Oka?
capital O-K-A,
Thanks.
Walter Oka. I won't spoil any of his life story. He's got some fascinating history. And he never stops smiling. He's like Superfoot Bill Wallace. Just a delight, a barrel of enthusiasm in class. Very inspirational. I wish I had a fraction of what he got in terms of enthusiasm.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. And that's, it's how do you say, it's our enthusiasm that keeps students coming back to us. Sense of humor helps, compassion helps, etc. But if we're enthusiastic, if students see that we believe, then there's a greater chance that they'll believe. And
I have a quick weapon specific age thing. And I don't want to become the bore who brings up cane constantly, but the cane is something I've worked on with Al for a while. And another sensei I've worked with is Mark Shuey. Some of you may have heard of him. He's cultivated the cane as a self-defense device over the last 30 years or so. And he began with a long background in mostly Korean martial arts like Hapkido and Tang Soo Do. And he got very much into how to use the cane as a primary self-defense device. But then he realized there's this whole other audience of people who are using canes purely as mobility devices because they need them in their 70s and 80s. And he adapted his art to accommodate that, in addition to using techniques that were mostly very martial arts oriented and very flamboyant. He became more aware of the need for stretching exercises and isometric and other forms of flexibility and strength development to get this audience of 70, 80, and 90-year-olds involved. And it's just a nice example of how you can adapt to circumstances and age, whatever age you are.
yeah, I do. I've often thought of several years ago, I came up with the concept of Jushin, which is basically taking basic jujitsu movements and making them a form of exercise. And it's done simply by executing the technique very slowly, almost like Tai Chi.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go out on my walks, I'll do it as I'm walking. People kind of look at me kind of weird, but it's like I'm flailing at insects, but I don't care.
You mentioned that as an alternative to close contact when COVID was really going.
Yeah, and I was considering teaching classes like that with the Parks Department if I couldn't go back to teaching jujitsu. And Adele said, "But you realize you're only going to get old people." And that didn't turn me on. So, I mean, everything is relative, but I think we have to, if we want to stay with the art as we get older, if we have a good base, we find ways to modify the art to suit our abilities. And I think using the cane, it's a fantastic self-defense tool. It's a great exercise tool. I used to have a black belt decades ago, as I said, I think in the last meeting, who he came up with some very effective techniques for people who use walkers. I mean, he came up with a really simple one where you could just move that puppy forward about half a foot, hook a person's ankle and break it, just by taking half a step forward with a walker. And that'll end a conflict. But and he was also pretty good in using a wheelchair. But I told him, I said, the disadvantage of you using a wheelchair is that you still have your lower body movement ability. I said, what we really need is to find a student who, I don't want to say who's a paraplegic, but you need you need someone like it to see what techniques can be done, and that you have to be able to experiment with a bit. And
That's a great topic. That's a potential topic for discussion. It's a very sensitive one. How do you, I know people who have dojos where they do have not disabled people, but they have people with serious lower body disabilities or limitations. And how adaptable is Budoshin to that? That's a huge selling point, a huge positive for it.
I'm jotting that down. Lower body disabilities. Right. Because I mean, there's no reason why a person who's in a wheelchair, as long as they have upper body movement, I mean, they play basketball, they go on, I'm going to say bicycle riding, but they do the bicycle things. They do
recumbent bikes sometimes, or yeah.
I've seen ice hockey. I mean, these people are not physically, they're not physically. Yeah, they're physically disabled, but they're not physically disabled. You know, they use what they have, and they use what they have well.
In the same sense that a 90-pound woman is not going to have the same set of abilities as a 200-pound male, and they adapt the art for their physicality. Right,
and I mean, when I taught junior high, and I had probably half the kids in that class were girls. It took the guys a while to realize why the girls were learning faster. And then finally one day I said, you know, the difference is you guys are still trying to use muscle. The girls realize they don't have muscle, they're learning technique. And once you start learning technique, then you're going to catch up with them. But anyway, you know, it's you have to, I think that's one of the nice things about jujitsu, if I can be prejudiced for a moment, is that it's such a flexible art that you can find things that work for you I don't want to say regardless of the disabilities you have, but if you end up being injured or something like that, there's still stuff you can do. You're not defenseless. Okay, let's move on here. The second topic is what makes a well-rounded martial artist? And Jeff, who's not with us, he's on a plane somewhere. Jeff Wynn. I don't know where he's flying to. Anyway, he says, I think anyone who has more than one martial arts background experience is well-rounded. Almost by definition, this would be any jujitsuka. Anybody want to comment on what's a well-rounded martial artist? Or what you think a well-rounded martial artist is or should be?
In my experience, Professor, starting in Shaolin and then coming to Jiu-Jitsu about 8 years later, I noticed that compared to my peers who started at Jiu-Jitsu was their first art, it's not better, but it's a different take on it, a different expression. And I found that students who might come into my dojo who have previously done like Taekwondo, once they realize it's not Jiu-Jitsu better than Taekwondo, it's a different family, then their Jiu-Jitsu tends to have a flavor that reflects where they came from. And I think that is contributing to their well-roundedness. As I've gotten older, I do a lot more of my Shaolin through the lens now of my Jiu-Jitsu, and now my Shaolin feels very different. To me, it's just the joy of what goes in the recipe? Some people like this in their soup, some don't. It's still soup. So.
Okay.
Sensei, I contribute something here in a word, perspective. If you earn one black belt and you are teaching, regardless of how accomplished you become in that discipline, if you close one eye, you can still see, but you don't have stereo vision. When you earn a black belt in any other discipline, you have stereo vision. You have a perspective that only the other discipline can bring. And that matures you greatly as a martial artist. Piano, there are 3 ways to play. People who only play one way wish they could do the other 2. People who can only do 2 wish they could do the one they can't do yet. And to be a well-rounded pianist, you got to do all 3, or you're going to find a lot of places that you can't play. To be a really qualified sensei, in my opinion, and this is only you need black belts and hard-earned black belts in 2 disciplines, any 2 disciplines, and that gives you the perspective. Getting back to that original word, that brings about maturity, both as a martial artist, practitioner, and as a sensei, as a teacher.
Okay. Anyone else have 2 cents they want to toss in or thoughts?
Yeah, I'll put my 2 thoughts in there. It's a huge thing to talk about. I mean, a massive thing to talk about. What is a martial artist? I think we first have to establish what is the definition of a martial artist. And you listen to some of these folks that I call them purists because they spent their whole lives in one style, and they said you never can be really good if you go around, drilling for a lot of different wells. You have to really specialize and be one thing. And so they don't really like the idea of all the, cross training experiences. I, for one, happen to like it. And it has made me personally a more well-rounded martial artist because I understand better now the different realms of fighting. But is a martial artist all about fighting? And obviously the answer is no. For those of us that have been in it for a long time, we understand it's a way of life. And that's really where my perspective as a martial artist. There's things we think about like honor, integrity, virtue, wisdom, and lifestyle. And that's why we say we don't retire, because that's who we are. And sometimes I think martial arts have found us. We didn't find them. It was our calling, in life that, we should do this. And there's also, not all martial artists are teachers or effective teachers. That's a whole different, thing to think about, is what makes a good teacher and martial artist. So I kind of like to think of myself personally as just a student, but I do respect and understand the value of learning the grappling arts and the kicking and punching arts, things like that. And it's just like in the military, to be an effective unit, when we went out on missions, every member of that unit had to be trained in every weapon system, including the 50 caliber. You had to be a medic. You had to know, all aspects. So if you had to assume that role, and a driver, you had to not operate the vehicle. So if you never drove a clutch before, you're kind of lost. And, that's what I'm thinking of on a practical level. Bruce Lee wrote at great length about cross training, because we know he specialized in Wing Chun, and then he saw his limitations once he got exposure to some other styles. So, that's my take on it. And, the longevity of it is that we can continue to learn, because there's so much in all those different styles, knowledge wise.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I would add to Al's thought about well-roundedness, that 500 years ago, to use the Japanese example, to be a samurai, to be a warrior, it was expected that you knew how to use several weapons as your first means of defending yourself and defeating enemies. And unarmed combat was seen as something you did if you didn't have weapons, and you needed to be adaptable for a wide variety of weapons. That's relevant to the military descriptions that Al just gave. If you're in combat, you need to be able to do a lot of different things potentially. That's one great definition of being a martial artist. But it's contextual, where yes, you can be in combat, and that's a very specific situation to be in. So if you know nothing about how to use first aid or save someone's life, that could be a big limiter. If you ask the common person, a non-martial artist, what defines a well-rounded martial artist to you or to the common person, they might say a mixed martial artist, because they are able to punch and kick and do groundwork and do a whole host of things. But again, the context is they want to win a mixed martial arts competition. That's a very specific end they have in mind. So that well-roundedness is geared to something very defined. So we should probably just begin with that end in mind, like, well-roundedness to what end? As we get older, we discussed earlier how we might want to cultivate flexibility and strength as we get into our 70s and 80s. And that's another context. So we should probably keep all that in mind.
Okay. Anyone else?
Sensei, in your situation, I pondered many times through the years what Harold Brocious brought to your training that Jack Secchi couldn't, and vice versa. Having more than one sensei is very valuable. Just like having more than one teacher on any topic that you're very serious about, you'll benefit from each teacher's contributing their strengths to your learning process.
Right. I think, obviously Jack Secchi was my base, and I spent a couple of years with Hal Brocious, and he knew why I was there to round out what I had learned from Secchi, and Secchi knew I was going to Brocious's dojo. I said, I told him I want to see the art from a different perspective. And they were both fine with it, except their rule was whatever you learn in the other dojo stops at the door to my dojo. And I respected that, and that's what allowed me to do that. And the Secchi was more, I don't want to say artsy, but he was more traditional than Hal Brocious was or is. I think Hal had a lot of police experience. I don't know whether he was with the Boston Police or Chicago Police Department, but he taught a lot. He taught things differently. Some of the techniques were identical, some were different. He put us in different situations. I mean, he even taught us how to defend ourselves in a phone booth, which no longer exists. But he was more tough street application of the art, and he had no qualms about ripping and tearing and biting and all these other quote unquote unethical martial arts skills, which you might need to use in a street situation. But in any case, I do agree. I think if you diversify your training, even if it's getting different instructors within the same martial art, it expands your knowledge base, and you tend to be more receptive to people who study other arts. I'm not opposed to cross training. I might be more pro towards it if I had had that opportunity as a younger person. But when I was younger, you had your choice of whether the judo at the Japanese Cultural Center, which I think is in Sun Valley. You had Secchi's Jujitsu, and then you either had Kenpo Karate with Ed Parker or Chuck Norris Karate. And those were your choices. I mean, there was nothing else. You didn't have Kung Fu. You didn't have any of the other. Tai Chi wasn't known. I mean, yes, all these arts did exist, but there was no one who was, how do you say, I don't want to say popular, because popular is an irrelevant term in the martial, well, no, it isn't. Because we know what's really popular today, and we'll survive it. But how do you say history works in our favor? If we live long enough, no. But I think what concerns me is, one, people who have on their bucket list to like get a black belt in karate, then a black belt in judo, and then a black belt in, all they want is their black belt, so they can say they have a bunch of black belts, but they really can't do anything with it because it was a bucket list item rather than something to, how do you say, improve their life or their outlook on life or how they handle their life, which is what, you know, we're here because of our commitment to our art or our martial arts background or backgrounds. And that is what concerns me, is people that get little bits and pieces of martial arts and then try and put it together. I think if you're going to study something, you need to study it till you have a firm foundation. By that time, it probably has some effect on your outlook on life as well. But anyway, what else do we have here?
I have something to add.
Yes.
This goes a little bit, maybe a little bit more in depth about the question of what makes a well-rounded martial artist. And although I appreciate the versatility and styles, but what about thinking about, you have some people that can really perform, that can really respond, that can really physically do technique really well as a martial artist, regardless of what style it is, regardless of what system they're doing. But they really can't teach, or maybe they don't know the lineage or the heritage behind it to be able to pass it along to the next individual. Or you have some individuals or some practitioners that can really teach, but they really can't pass it along, or you know, they can't perform as well as they can teach or explain or demonstrate. To me, you know, a well-rounded martial artist would be all of the above. Someone that has the insight, someone that has the knowledge, someone that has the experience to not only be able to perform it physically, but not only teach it, but also be able to pass it along in lineage and heritage as well. And I get, you know, martial arts and mixed martial arts. There's a goal. There's also rules and regulations, and then you look at the, you know, realism and what goes on in you know, outside in the real world to be able to do things and accomplish them. Physically, can you do them, or can you just talk about them? You know, which one makes the most well-rounded martial artist? And I believe it's a combination of all, regardless of the versatility of styles that you've been involved in.
Right. No, I agree with you on that. There are some martial artists that can, for lack of a better phrase, perform their art beautifully, but either can't teach or don't want to teach worth, and I won't say the next word. And that's a concern. That's a later topic about, you know, expecting students to become sensei when they get to black belt. But that's a topic we're going to hit on later, and I know it won't happen today, but it's a topic that's down there now. To me, a well-rounded martial artist is a person. They have a good understanding of their art. I'm still learning. I mean, that's my attitude. I've been in it this is my 55th year. I'm still learning. I still consider myself a student. I'll have students who brown belts or lower rank black belts that'll put stuff together in manners that I haven't seen yet, which is okay. And I'll ask them how they do it, you know, what they're going through, and then I say, okay, that's, you know, I mean, to me, that's part of the learning process. I know, quote unquote, I know the basic moves, but I think I don't know if it's Stuart Anderson or Ron Brenes, one of the other two. The guy he's a physicist of some sort, and he came up with the projections on if if there are 30 to 40 basic movements in jujitsu, the number of potential techniques is someplace around 20 or 30,000. And how many of us know 20 or 30,000 combinations of techniques? So I think being well-rounded means you have to have an open mind to the martial arts as a whole. You can say, okay, I believe my martial art is better because, but I also realize that jujitsu has its traditional jujitsu has its limitations. There are any martial art, there are strengths and there are weaknesses to them. And I think as long as we recognize them, we can be more open to seeing the value of other martial arts. I think being a well-rounded martial artist goes beyond the physical aspect. I think there's some intellectual growth that's necessary. And how do you say, I think I'm looking at my library of martial arts books, which basically I think is maybe 20 or 30 books. I've seen some, don't ask me to quote what's in any of them. But I think we have an obligation to ourselves and our students to be well-read in our subject area, to be knowledgeable philosophically. I think that's part of being a well-rounded martial artist. I used to tell my kids in high school, you want to make sure you read before you go to college or enter the real world. You want to make sure you read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, read Machiavelli, read the Bible, read the Quran, read the Rig Veda, read some of the Buddhist works. You need all of this to give you a better understanding of yourself and the world you live in. And some of them take me seriously, and others, and all you can do as a sensei is try to be a good example for your students or a teacher, and that's what I think it comes down to. And Kris is sitting there stoically.
I'm just waiting. Everybody has good stuff to share, but yeah, if I can jump in, the question is not unique to a martial artist. I think sometimes things get lost when we try to translate, things in English from Japanese or other languages. It's really three things when what we're talking about here. And it's important to remember that art is fluid. Science is consistent. So for things to work and work well and evolve and adapt, those two things have to be true. Now, in between that, you have skill. So the science has to be consistent and universal. And and the skill is your understanding and ability to apply that science. And then the art is your particular approach to delivering those skill sets. And that needs to be fluid because you need to adapt to changing situations. So you can talk about it in terms of grappling versus striking, weapons, versus, this and that, or you can be talking about the arena, whether it's sports, street, military, whatever the case is. So as you become better rounded, you need to have a good understanding of the science. You have to have developed a skill set to be able to deliver that in the form of techniques and all that. And then, the better rounded you become, the better artist, you become too, because now you can paint anything, basically. You teach kids, you teach adults, you apply it yourself, whether you're in the police force, military, or anything in between. You're able to do that because you see it as an art. It's your art. So art is not necessarily tied to a set of techniques. Art is tied to people, and each person is different. So the art is going to be slightly different. That's why you get different flavors. I think I've used the example before. If we were all to take a painting class and none of us have painted before, we have to learn the different kind of oils, the different kind of paint brushes, different kind of canvas, and then how to basically apply that, to the canvas. Then if our teacher was to take us all out and put us in front of the same tree and said, paint this tree, all of our paintings are going to look a little bit different. We're all applying the same science. We all learn the same skill set, but we see life a little bit differently. And depending on which side of the tree we're on, our perspective is going to be a little bit different. And it's all true, right? It's all true. So sometimes you have to look at each person's painting to get a full picture of what the tree is, and other times it's so abstract that it only makes sense to the person that's painting it. So oddly enough, this is tied to the first question that came up, and it goes back to, a story from the 50s, and it happened in the car industry. The World War II was over, the Industrial Revolution was at full pace. And if you're into cars, car races were in full force, and there's a race that still goes on today. It's called Le Mans. It's in France. And back then it was all about the muscle cars. Everybody was adding more power to their cars to go faster and faster to win. Well, one of the entries in a particular year was this car that was basically nobody thought would have a chance. That ended up winning the whole thing. And this car used a rear engine setup, and it was air cooled. and miraculously, it won everybody else that had significantly more horsepower, that had been racing a lot longer. And the gentleman that was behind that car, his name was Ferdinand Porsche. So as we know now, it's a well-known brand. And yes, it wasn't the 911, but it was the same configuration. Somebody pointed it in the chat here. But what went into that? A very good understanding of science and engineering, an amazing skill set from the mechanics and the builders of the car, and an amazing skill set from the driver, but also the art of the driver, because there's strategy. Also, it's not just horsepower. It's not just how you bring that horsepower to the four wheels, but it's also the art of driving, the race. You can't just gun it the whole time. So martial arts is the same way. MMA is just one portion of it, so you can be in phenomenal shape at a young age and then fall apart. You don't really see older MMA people, very much still performing the same way, but you do see the little, the little guy sometimes in their elder years that can still do amazing things. So today is the instructor I work out with on a regular basis is his 82nd birthday. Yesterday, I spent a full hour with him training hard. Some of that time we were sparring, and he is still lightning quick and hits like a tank. Okay, so he can punch a hole in most of us. So how is that possible? Well, he's gotten really good at his skill set and his art of being able to apply that. And as a person I train with on a regular basis. So there is no retirement from life. There is retirement from activities. And this is the difference between sometimes the Japanese culture. I heard, I think it was Thomas, he indicated that in Japan, you become more valuable, as you get older. Well, that's true for a reason. And it's also true here for a reason, not true here for a reason. And the reason is because their activity oftentimes is part of their life. So they don't retire from their activity because they don't retire from life, which means that they're continuing to get better and better and better at it. And the younger people just they can't match that. And that's why they're valuable. Here, we treat work separately. We treat entertainment separately. We treat other things separately. And so what happens is in time, we retire from those activities. We stop doing that or severely limited, and then we move on to other things. So you stop improving in whatever you were doing and almost kind of starting over and over again. And so you have younger people then with newer knowledge and experience who can outdo you, And so if what you were doing was based on physical activity, you're going to be done by a certain age. And no matter how good your knowledge is, you're not going to be able to match, somebody that's younger than you. It's just physics. Your cells are not regenerating as fast as theirs, right? So recovery is going to be slower and everything else. So it's important to think of, a better way to think of it is your martial arts, whatever label you want to put on it, is that a do or is that a jitsu? Jitsu is a skill, okay? Do is a path, is a way. So is it part of your life? So if you see it as a part of your life, you're always going to find a way to adapt it to your current life circumstances, and therefore continue to improve and continue to be more valuable. But if it's not part of your life, if you're treating it as a separate thing, then when your physical limitations kick in, it's going to end too, because you're going to see it as a separate activity. And okay, well, I can't do this anymore. And you never saw it as a part of your life, and you stop doing that at some point. So to me, that it's an important thing of how we think of something in the first place. Any relationship you get into, are you seeing that as a lifelong relationship with that person? Or is it something until something better comes along? It shapes the way you pursue that relationship. It shapes the way you do things. If you see it as a lifelong thing until kind of death do us part, then that's the way you're going to approach it. And no matter what kind of turn, it takes on you or the other person, you're going to find a way to make it work because that's the way you've wired yourself to think of it. So martial arts is no different. And you have to look at, that's why the Japanese use the word sensei. Sensei is not teacher. The literal definition of sensei is one who has gone before. So they're just further down the path. And if that's the path you're on, then you'll look, they're further down. Oh, they're still improving. They're still doing great. They're adapting, to the situation. That's the path I want to be on. But if your teacher is, stopping or moving on to other things, and that's not consistent with the path you want to be on, then you got to change teachers or you got to change your path.
Yeah, Chris brought up several excellent examples. And they all, to me, have to do with the context of what you're trying to achieve. You mentioned boxing and MMA, where the goal of somebody who takes up boxing as a young person might be to become a great competitive boxer. But in the course of becoming great at that series of techniques, they're also often damaging their head, that they might have long-term negative repercussions from becoming an excellent boxer or an excellent MMA fighter because of these constant hits they're taking. Those hits could leave them with permanent brain damage over time, or at least affect them negatively when they're in their 20s and 30s and beyond. So that could be damaging the holistic long life aspiration of using martial arts as a healthy way of living life. I think younger people, especially as they're considering taking up arts, it's a very difficult concern if you start out, say, doing Taekwondo at age 10, and your goal is to become a black belt first, and then maybe an advanced black belt, but you realize that Taekwondo is very limiting in some ways, and that it's so focused on punching and kicking. What if somebody grabbed me? If you're thinking of self-defense contexts, what if they watch an MMA competition and realize I know nothing about joint locks or submissions, and here I am spending all my time doing Taekwondo? It sort of forces them to be skeptical about what they're doing and maybe explore another martial art or even give up Taekwondo because they realize it's too limiting. By the same token, a judo person could say, I want to be an Olympic judoka. But on the other hand, if their goal is more self-defense oriented, they realize that they know nothing about punching and kicking, and that could be a limiter for their pursuit. So I don't see this as, I've started judo or I've started Taekwondo at age 10, and if I quit or I explore something else, I'm being disloyal to that art or that pursuit. It's more this heightened awareness of what a given pursuit might impose, and just being as open-minded to the limitations of what you're doing, and finding other arts to pursue at the same time or as complements that might work, and be aware of the long-term repercussions of boxing or other things that could ruin your physical life long-term.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, you know, if somebody's in love with the label Taekwondo, then stick with it, but adapt, you know, bring in other things that maybe your teacher is not providing, and make it your Taekwondo. You see, then that's your art. You know, the label becomes less important then. But what we do is, especially in the West, I think it's a way for us to reconcile things. We need to compartmentalize things for things to make sense. Otherwise, it's just too broad, too general, and most people are uncomfortable with that. Where with Asian cultures, they love contemplating that, they love pursuing that, and they spend their whole life trying to understand it. But we're quick. We need quick answers. So we compartmentalize things and define things. And sports has contributed to that, because sports introduces specific rules. So Taekwondo started off as basically Japanese karate to teach the newly formed Korean military combat techniques. Okay, so I guarantee you it had grappling in it. I guarantee you it had things that you don't see in it. But at some point, they decided to enter the country in the Olympic scene and took their military art and put rules around it to make it a sport. You got to do that to make it safe. Well, they just happen to decide that you get 2 points if you kick and 1 point if you punch. And by the way, we're not going to do grappling because it's unsafe. Okay, so then it turns into more of a kicking art, which is what we know it of, because you get more points, right? So if you're going to compete, you're going to spend more of your time learning how to kick better because you can get higher scores. But you don't have to. That doesn't have to be your Taekwondo. You see, so the label to me is always less important. It's only important if the person is confused, which is, I think, hurting things in our martial arts community, because it's like, I have to leave this to go do that. You know, then that no longer suits my purpose, or I need more, so I have to leave this to go do that. Well, if you like, a lot of the aspects of what you do, stick with it, but also learn the other things. And in Jiu-Jitsu, this is why you had kind of what I call sub-labels, as you do in karate and everything else. So you have like Daitoru Jiu-Jitsu, Daitoru Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu, but they all have Jiu-Jitsu in the name, right? At some point, a person or a group of people decided to attach a sub-label to it, because that was their version of it, and they wanted to differentiate it from just a general term. Same thing happened in karate. Same thing happens in everything else. I mean, look at Brazilian jiu-jitsu of all things. I mean, it's mostly newaza. It's a subset of jiu-jitsu, right? Of the bigger picture. But that's what they decided to focus on, which is fine, but it's a subset. That's all it is,
It brings to mind Seki's statement that there's only jujitsu. George, I remember reading that in one of your books. It's not, why give it a name if it's all the same thing?
One of the things, and I think that Kris brought up is making the art our own. As a sensei, I see myself as having a responsibility to teach all the elements of the art that I know, whether or not I can do them well, whether or not I like them. Okay, there are techniques I teach that I don't think I don't think much of them. Okay, but and there are some techniques I teach just to get a concept across. But then there's, how do you say, my own jujitsu, and that has changed over the years. I know Seki's jujitsu, he was probably more heavy into the judo aspect of it than I am. I've kind of worked my way towards, I'm more into the joint locking, the Aikido, the use of nerve techniques, things of that sort as I've gotten older, because I found that they, quote unquote, worked better for me. And I think we as sensei, we do tend to personalize the art. We make it our own. What we have to be aware of is that we have a responsibility to teach our students as much of what we know, regardless of what we've learned. Okay, if we've learned taekwondo and jiu-jitsu and kung fu or whatever, and we've put it together into something, we have and if we're teaching that, okay, we have a responsibility to teach all of that, because our students ultimately will find those things. If we're like, how do you say it? Seki taught for the purpose of self-defense. Self-defense is very personalized. You cannot standardize it. Okay, people will find different people if they have if we've given them a strong base. Whether you call it they've developed a strong skill set, to use Kris's word for skill. Okay, they've taken the science, they've taken the fluidity, and they've taken their capabilities and they put it together. Every person will develop their own self-defense skills. Okay, and they'll find that certain techniques work better for them than others. I mean, that's the way the world works. Okay, we're not all the same. I wouldn't expect any of you to use the same techniques I used for any particular attack. Maybe part of that's because of my jiu-jitsu background. But I think we have a responsibility to teach everything, so our students have the ability to choose what works best for them, or not choose. Their bodies, their skill level will determine what works best for them. And that then becomes, quote unquote, back to Kris, their art. I think the reason I got into jiu-jitsu, and it goes back to Seki and also to Porsche to some extent, the nicety of jiu-jitsu is because it is so broad, which is its chief disadvantage, which makes it much more difficult to teach, is that once you have developed a good skill set, back to Kris, you become almost unpredictable. No one can predict what, quote unquote, general art you're going. Are you going to use judo? You're going to use aikido? You're going to use judo? You're going to use something else. No one can, and probably not even yourself, because in a street situation, ideally you're in a state of motion. No one can predict what you are going to do. And I know, only speaking from my own personal experience, because I have had to use it, there are times where you go into a situation and you have to say, I think I can use this, but we'll see what happens. And usually, regardless of what you think you're going to do, it becomes, we'll see what happens. And if you have a good skill set, we'll see what happens works out. And then afterwards, if you're lucky, you may be able to figure out what you did. But I think that Chris, I want to thank you for that. This has been a really good discussion on this topic, and it's kind of right. We've gone back to when you retire, as you get older, everything is kind of what impresses me. There, how do you say it? Some of our Zoom discussions are good. Others, like this one, we've been able to go back and forth from the first topic to the third topic, and we've established a relationship, and that I think is what's tying this discussion together. And that's, to me, as a teacher, not necessarily as a sensei, but as a teacher, that makes me feel good, because okay, this discussion has I'm trying to think of a phrase here. This discussion has encompassed more than I anticipated. And I've learned from it. And to me, that's important. I say, if I didn't learn something from these Zoom meetings, we would not be doing them. So, I do want to compliment all of you, because it's just sometimes the topics really gel well with each other, and that's nice to see.
Now, Sensei, the example you used with Seki too is also interesting, that he was more heavy on like the throws, because that's kind of the indicative of the path Jiu-Jitsu has followed. Because if you go pre-Meiji restoration period in Japan, the Jiu-Jitsu would have been more heavy on throws, because you would be encountering more armored people, right, in application. So kicking and punching would have limited effect, and so would small joint manipulation. Yes. So as you move more into post-Meiji restoration and kind of the end of the samurai era, and then you have the original, what we would call the police, now, that became the profession of the last generation samurais, right? Now you're in the civilian force, and pretty much you're never encountering armored people. So the art adapts, they adapt the art, to include more arrest, type of techniques. So more joint-like manipulations with some atemi, to loosen them up, probably, and then you move into the kind of the judo era, where now it transitions into a sport, and then all the other dangerous techniques get taken out. So the path kind of splits at that point. You have the sports, and then more the civilian self-defense application. And that's kind of the path it takes. And that's why it's important, as an individual, you decide what path you want to be on, and pursue the things that will make that path more fulfilling and complete for you. It's very important to remember, in the old days, people didn't seek out an art to study. They sought out an instructor, a good instructor, a notable instructor, because they were learning that instructors' interpretation, they were learning their art as that instructor was doing it at that time. And depending on when they trained with them, they could have had a different experience. Yoshiba was a perfect example of that. the pre-war Aikido that he taught, which he called Jujitsu, is very different than the post-war Aikido, that he taught. And so even today, the two prominent organizations that came out of that is Yoshinkan, which is more pre-war, and then you have Aikikai, which is more post-war, because his art, changed. His science and skill set didn't change, but his art changed because his path changed. There was an awakening after World War II. We ain't going to win this thing. So, basically, it's better to pursue peace and how we can use our skills to pursue peace. And that changed his art. He was painting with a different brush, at that point.
Yeah, Chris, Iaido is an excellent example to take
Right.
to use something like the prevalence of the katana in Japanese culture up until the Restoration, and how it was a critical combat tool and something that had tremendous practical value on many, many levels. And of course, it has iconic symbolic value in Japanese culture. And if you look at Aiki-Jitsu or Aiki-Jutsu, where there is a focus on the practical use of the sword as a tool of battle, something that has very hard-edged, delineated function. But now that swords, moving into the 20th century, have very limited practical value for self-defense. We can't carry them around the streets, and we would never think of using one in combat. Iaido, the way path is opened up for it to cultivate a more meditative, spiritual self-realization aspect, and that's how it's studied today. And that's a perfect example of how you can adapt one object for different ends. To say, well, why am I studying this martial art? Why am I pursuing this? You'd have a radically different answer 100 years ago or 150 years ago to why am I studying how to use the katana? It's a much different answer now that we have no practical use for it, but it has enormous spiritual and developmental and meditative aspects to it. So it's a very good example.
One of the things to go back to Chris again is I think we still today, any serious martial person who's seriously studying in martial art seeks out particular instructors. I know when I was in high school, we did what was called, we ran for classes. Teachers had certain reputations, and you wanted to be in a certain teacher's class, and it was first come, first serve. I know when I taught in high school, in junior high, two most popular classes were Jiu-Jitsu and junior ROTC, surprisingly. And kids, they wanted those two classes. And the principal said, the reason these two classes do so well is because they have a sense of discipline about them. And he said, plus they're good instructors. The kids want to be with those instructors. I know when I taught economics, kids wanted to be in my class because of the simulations I did. We have, as sensei, we have certain strengths. And when other people recognize those strengths, then they want to be our students. The art is important, okay? For BJJ, there's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, there's Machado Jiu-Jitsu, there's probably a few others floating around now. And those are all Brazilian, okay? They're all Newasa, okay? But it's who's teaching them and their approach to teaching. And I think that's an important factor. You as a sensei have to, you create a public image of who you are and what the art is by how you are not only in the dojo, but outside of the dojo, how you treat your students, how you respect your students, and all these other factors come into play. And all those is what makes you a sensei, as Kris says, because you've been there and you're further down the road and they want to be like you are. Okay. That's a scary thought for me at times. But I think that's our responsibility, is to provide as good an example as possible of ideally what a good sensei is. And that's what attracts the students, assuming they have a choice. Okay. You look at, almost anything. There are companies that people prefer to work for, and companies that employees would leave the first chance they get if they could afford to do so. And it's because how the company is run and the leadership of that company. When I was in high school, I worked in a custom machine shop. The guy had dropped out of school in the 8th grade to help support his family. He had a 6-figure income in the early 60s. Phenomenal. His employee, we loved the guy. He didn't sit behind a desk. He was always in the quote unquote shop area, either seeing what we were doing, helping us do something better, doing some of the work himself. And you had a relationship with him beyond he's the boss. And that I think is a critical element for us as sensei, is that we, our students see us as so many different things from so many different perspectives. And that's a hell of a responsibility as a sensei, because your teacher, your counselor, your parent. You don't have to try to be their. You don't have to try to be their friend. That's one of the worst mistakes you can make in life. You have to be respectful of them. Okay, and if you can do all these 4 things, you're going to do well as a sensei, because they're, as I'm sure all of you know, their word of mouth is your best advertising. And that's in anything in life. People say, what kind of smartphone do you have? I say, I have a Samsung, I like it. They say, I have an iPhone. And my comment sometimes is, well, where's your U phone? But just to be stupid, and that confuses them for a moment. But certain things are more popular than other. And use a sensei if there are other arts around. Your art is important, but you as a sensei become the, you become the honey that draws the flies. It's a bad anomaly. What's the term?
Analogy.
A bad analogy. Yes, very bad analogy. But that's why Kris says, the skill set is important, the science is important, the fluidity is important, because all of these come together in your dojo, and you're responsible to see that all of that comes together and works. And when the students leave, they feel they've gained something out of what you have given them, or what you've tried to give them. Okay.
I hope I wish some of what you just described, George, were more teachable, in that you're very charismatic. You've been able to develop and cultivate this very large ryu of jujitsu because you're an inspiring personality. And as the trickle down effect might be in dojos where you have sensei who could be teaching not just Budoshin Jujitsu, but any art. And because of their appealing personalities and their ability to cultivate people on many different levels, they're successful. And I don't know that everybody has that as a natural ability, but somehow conveying key qualities of a good sensei that are beyond the technical abilities that all sensei would presumably have. How do you maintain relationships and inspire people to continue in arts? Those are sometimes the intangibles that keep Ryu going, and they're hard to come by.
Okay. I've had a lot of student. I was very fortunate in my teaching career. I had a lot of student teachers, somewhere between 8 and 10. Most teachers consider themselves lucky if they get one. I enjoyed having student teachers because they kept updating my teaching skills with new stuff that came along. But they'd say, how do you manage your class? How do you walk out at the end of the day with a smile on your face? And I said, and I learned this my first couple of years teaching junior high, and those kids are crazy. You have to be fair with them. You have to be honest with them, and you have to treat your students with respect. And if you can get those 3 ideas across and your students accept them, and you don't put yourself on a pedestal, in essence, you're equal to them, but you're playing a different role. If they see that you respect them and you're fair and you're honest, that's all, particularly kids, that's all they want. How do you say? Kids are not as, how do you say? And there are teachers that think kids are animals. Kids are kids, and they want a sense of security. And I think that's our responsibility as sensei, is to give them that sense of, and those are my 3 ways of doing it. And that's very difficult. I know from some student teachers that is very difficult for them, because as my first principal said, and I hate to keep going back to classroom teaching, he said, if you're going to be a successful teacher, and I'm going to say, if you're going to be a successful sensei, you have to be able to walk the fence. You cannot be too strict and hard-nosed. You cannot be their friend, or your intention cannot be to be their friend. That's kind of a payoff for being fair and honest and respectable. You have the right to expect respect in return. Although for kids, sometimes that's difficult. They do get better. I've had some gangbangers that, would treat you like dirt, and they do come around eventually. It's just some people, it takes longer, but that to me is the key. And that's why in the student handbook, philosophically, I say it's integrity, humility, and respect are the 3 things I work on, and with my students. But I really think respect is the key. You have to treat your students as you would like them to treat you.
It would be nice to hear that explicitly discussed, the three core values of Budoshin. And having done it for a long time, sometimes it's alluded to, but the moral or ethical qualities of an art are so critical, especially in ours, and maybe to encourage sensei to explore them instead of getting completely consumed in technical things. As important as they are, I don't question that at all, but relating what you're doing on a technical level to what the self-developmental side is, and the ethical qualities might be worth encouraging.
Yeah. Okay. It's I'll get that down here. Respect. Bear with me. Humility. And respect, humility, and
Integrity.
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 Yeah.
Three versions of essentially the same thing.
Pardon?
There's a lot of overlapping. Yeah.
There's a
Yeah,
lot
oh,
of
yes,
overlapping.
yes.
Yeah.
They all overlap. They're all dependent upon each other. I think what it comes down to is, I'm going to jot this down too. Be a nurturing parent. I think if you're going to be a good sensei, you have to be a nurturing parent. You have to, when students screw up, you have to say, you don't want to say, okay, stupid, let's try this again. That's not going to work. Okay. You have to be, how do you say? You have to be solution oriented with people. You have to say that didn't work. Here's what, sometimes you point out what they did wrong, but it's more important to say, try this again, but do it this way. And if it works out right for them, then you don't have to worry about criticizing them for doing something wrong. Because students are smart. They'll figure out, hey, this is a better way of doing it. Thank you, Sensei, for showing me a better way. Rather than I got chewed out for doing something wrong. Okay. That's one thing. You have to be a parent. You have to you have to be positive oriented, solution oriented when something comes up. Okay. Because students will pick up that you're interested in them improving rather than you want to make a point that they did something wrong. We all do stuff wrong. That's our nature as human beings. We do things wrong every day and we correct ourselves, or sometimes other people correct us. Or sometimes we may figure out two or 3 days down the road, gee, that was stupid of me to do. I could have done it this way and it would be right. So it's, you have to, I find it's easier to deal with correcting problems by looking at the solution rather than dealing with the problem or what they did wrong and why it doesn't work.
There's also for the more historically interested students, we come across something like relating our value system to the historic standards of samurai, the Bushido, or other standards that aren't an exact overlap with what the Budoshin core values are, but are interesting to explore. I know in Al's art, which is Korean, there's the focus on the Hwarang code, which is overlapping with the samurai code of Bushido. And that may stimulate some students, not that it's an answer or it's something we want to integrate fully into Budoshin, but worth considering.
Yeah, I think you can integrate, I won't say older concepts, although some of these older concepts are just as valid today as they were 500 or 1,000 years ago. If the students can see the relationship, this is one reason and some sensei have been critical of me, and even parents. Usually the second night of class in a new session, I'll put new students in a self-defense situation, and I call it deer in the headlight training. And early on, if they're confronted, because end of class, I like to have students deal with random attacks. And you do that to a new student who's still trying to learn their correct standing position. And they look like a deer in the headlights, if you're familiar with the term. If you're not familiar with the term, look it up online. But it basically means you stand there dumbfounded, you have absolutely no idea what to do. And that's why most people lose fights. is they don't know what to do initially. It has nothing to do with martial arts. They don't know what to do initially. And so they get hit or whatever, okay? The same thing would occur with trained military versus someone who doesn't know one end of a rifle from its butt, okay? If you don't know what to do, you're dead meat. And it takes students about, I'll say, 2 to 3 months before they start getting the concept that they can do something when they're attacked. And their technique execution may suck initially. I'm sorry about the phrase. They may have really lousy technique execution, but they will be doing something and they get better. Okay, that's the key. They get better and they realize they're getting better. And that to me is just as important as knowing all 860 some odd techniques that are in the Budoshin Jujitsu Densho. Because if you don't know how to get from point A to point B, it doesn't matter what you know. You're not gonna get to point B. And that and I get flack on that from other sensei. I get flack on it from other parents. But I said, you just have to be patient. They're students. They're learning. They will get better. As I tell my students, you will not, even when I taught public school, you will not get worse in this class. The only way you can go is to get better. And if they see that you as an instructor believe in that, and it infers that you believe in their ability and in them, you're going to be more successful. Because
Sensei, one of the things that you had mentioned about the deer in the headlights is a lot of times the student can't always see the progress. And as much as others from the outside looking in could see the progress, I always like to offer them to the first night when they have that deer in the headlights look and have no idea how to respond, react, or even do anything, to be able to video that time, because in 3 months difference, 2-3 months time, you can see the night and day difference on how they respond and perform.
Right. And that to me is a critical skill, regardless of martial art. I know there are some martial arts that train, they won't let you do any self-defense until you're a black belt. It's like there's a rule. I've been to seminars that I've gone to, and the instructor says, we don't do this until they're black belt. And my response is, I said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's no sign on every lamppost that says, muggers, be sure to ask your victim if they're a black belt. Because, it doesn't make sense to me, and it didn't make sense to Seki either. It doesn't make sense to put that restriction on teaching, okay? Because teaching self-defense is an art. Teaching an art, martial art, is an art. Teaching is an art. Learning is an art, okay? We're all a bunch of artists. As Chris said, I think it was Chris, or who was it said, it just depends what paintbrush we pick up. But if we're going to be successful sensei, we can have standards, we can have high standards, we can have high expectations, but we also have to be willing to help our students get there. And that's where the integrity, humility, respect all come into play, because they need to see you as there to help them. Anyway, I've talked too much. I'm sorry, Thomas Deneen.
Oh, that's partly why we're here.
Yeah. I'll say one additional thing, and then I think we're going to stop for the day. We can all learn from our students. That happens so many times in my classroom as a public school teacher. It's happened in the dojo. I've learned better ways to teach techniques from my jujitsu students. Okay. And you just, as a sensei, sometimes you have to, if a student says, can I do the technique this way? Or can I, can I do the technique this way? Or can I show this other student how to do the technique a different way? Sometimes they have a better way of teaching a technique than you do. And some senseis, some even classroom teachers get really bent out of shape when that happens because they think it undermines their authority. And the reality is it doesn't. It doesn't undermine your authority. What students learn is that you're open-minded and you're willing to be receptive to different ways of doing things. And it may work for the better. It may not. One thing I do, and I'll leave you with this one thing because it's so important. If a student comes up with a different way of doing a technique, I will usually say, show it to the class, see if the other students can do it. If other students can do it, then it has some validity. And we all know there are different ways to teach techniques. If no one can do it, then maybe that's just their baby. And that's the way life is. But it doesn't, and just because a student can do something differently or teaches a technique differently, it doesn't undermine your authority because you're the one that provided the inspiration that put them in the position where they were willing to take that risk to ask you, can I do it this way? And that's a compliment to you. And a lot of it's perception. So anyway, next week or next time, we're going to get to problem students in the dojo. I think we've hit on that before. We're going to get into how do we get kids to leave the dojo if we don't want to have them in there? There are conditions. What's in your dojo first aid kit? Do you have one? Guest instructors, how do you deal with them? Some are good, some are bad. I've had both. How often do the students clean the mats in your dojo? In some RU, black belts are teaching grades. In some RU, they aren't necessarily. What role? Here's a new one that these last three came up yesterday evening from someone, I forget who. What role, if any, should a martial philosophy or code of conduct play in instruction? I think we touched on that very briefly today.
Yeah.
But okay.
That'd be of great interest.
Okay. With the advent of video instruction and testing, might Sensei think of their dojos as two dojo, one local and one virtual? Pros and cons. Some martial arts groups have a Black Belt Hall of Fame. Some are spurious, some are legitimate. AJA, I think AJA used to have one. Every regional director used to be able to nominate one. How'd it go back then? Back in the day, there was every regional director could nominate one person, one sensei as outstanding sensei for their region. Then there was a national outstanding sensei, which the board voted on. Every sensei could nominate one student from their dojo as an outstanding student of the year. And they'd submit those to the regional director, and the regional director would then select an outstanding student for the region. I mean, there are a lot of things that can be done to an extent improve participation. The downside of the awards, and I don't know, part of it comes from watching kids sports, is everybody gets a trophy.
Participation awards.
Participation awards. And I think those are, I mean, it's like, to me, those don't mean anything. It's like thank you for breathing award. I mean, I think kids deserve, or particularly everybody deserves, recognition for their accomplishments. That's why we have belts. Seki used to award pins that would go on the belts if you like went in a demonstration, or for helping out other students or things that, you know, he found ways to, you know, compliment students for tons of stuff in spite of his strictness. Or if you were in a tournament, you'd get a pin. He'd award you a pin on your belt. And some students had, you know, 8, 12. I had students had 12, 15 pins on their belts by the time they left me. And those suckers make really vicious weapons. But on the other side, but there, you know, there are ways of complimenting students. And I think, you know, whereas organizational awards can be good to an extent, if you get too many of them, they lose their value, so to speak. It becomes a thank you for breathing award.
It's like academia, where if 80% of a given college class graduates with honors, well, what does graduating with honors really mean? What does that mean as a distinction? It doesn't mean very much. It's more like, well, why didn't you get honors? And awards can become like that. But if they're real distinctions, if one out of hundreds of people get them every few years, then you have to offer that context when you're giving the awards, or if you're describing to someone, well, what does that distinguished service award mean? Well, here's the background.
Right. And to me, any legitimate award has to have a good intention, a good reason. It has to be legitimate. It can't be just to, for lack of a better phrase, it can't just be to keep the troops happy. So, because amazingly, the troops see through that sort of stuff real fast. Anyway, so we'll see you in 2 weeks. On today's the 5th, it'll be the 9th. 14 days will be the 19th, I believe, of February. Is that
Could I just ask Jonathan Kruger what time it is in Zambia?
What time is it? Yes, Jonathan, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here. That was very interesting topics you were bringing up.
What time
Thank you
is
for
it
allowing
there?
me. It is, it's getting up to nearly 8 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, it's almost bedtime time. Anyway.
No, it's Saturday, so I'm fine. I've
You're
finished my
fine.
training
Okay.
today.
Okay. You can
Yeah,
stay
so
up later.
I might stay up and watch a movie with the kids.
Okay.
They're wanting to watch Star Trek, so we'll watch a bit of Star Trek.
Oh,
with them.
okay. Good movie. Good man. Okay.
Mr. Kirby, it's an honor to actually talk to you. And thank you, Tom, for allowing me to be part of this as well.
Well,
actually, you're quite a big hero in our dojo.
Thank you. You got to speak up more. We.
All right, sorry. I'm just saying that back here in Zambia, you're quite a legend amongst the Jujitsu and Judo clubs.
Thank you.
So it's a big honor to actually talk to you for the first time. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm humbled by it.
Yes, and I remember first actually talking to you in 2009, and I still have all the affiliation, the AJA affiliation certificates.
Good,
in my
good,
room.
good, good.
Yes, yes.
So anyway, go watch Star Trek.
Thank you, thank you.
I love it too. And we're going to draw today's Zoom meeting to a close. And I hope to get it up sometime next week. This past week has been absolutely insane in terms of email, and occasionally even though I'm no longer officially involved with the AJA, I do occasionally get called for advice on certain matters. And that's, it's just to say something. I don't want to say anything other than, but it's the hard part is trying to be completely neutral and not take any particular position, but to try to get to for lack of a better phrase, the truth of the matter. Because that's to me, that's what an organization is about, is working based on fact and working based on, that people have a good understanding of what's actually going on. Anyway, so enjoy, Tom, and have a great weekend. And I wish you all the best. We'll see you on the 19th. And if you want anyone else to get involved in this, tell them to get in touch with me, and I'll put them on my email list.
Are Al and Jonathan are on your distribution now, George, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I learned so much just by listening.
Yeah.
So please forgive me for doing that. I mean,
that listening is important, but if you have a question, ask, because sometimes we
yes, thank you for allowing me to do that.
Ask because sometimes it just indicates something that's being glossed over or something that we're assuming, and we all know the alternate meaning for assume.
And Jonathan, you've got some fascinating context there in Zambia with the age of your dojo and the achievements of some of your students in judo and jiu-jitsu. Really interested to hear more about that.
Yeah.
I'd be very happy, and I'd be honored to talk and share.
Okay.
Please do.
Okay, let's draw it to a close, and see you all in 2 weeks. And don't do anything too dangerous in the meantime.
All right,
Thank
Tom,
you.
keep the cane reference. I think everybody appreciates it.
Definitely. Tell me if I'm going too far.
Yeah.
No, we're all good.
Another Canaanite. Okay.
That's the nice one, Darren. See ya.
Thank you.